The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air as Lily Johnson stepped into Mason's diner. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the restaurant was bustling with the usual breakfast crowd. Lily, dressed in a simple black blazer and jeans, chose a booth near the window, hoping for a quiet moment before her long day ahead. She had a stack of papers in her bag, cases to review, but for now, she wanted to enjoy her meal in peace. As she settled in, the diner's manager, Gary, a middle-aged man with a receding hairline and a perpetual scowl, stood behind the counter barking orders at the staff. The staff moved swiftly except for one, a young waiter named Brad. Brad, with his slick-back blonde hair and a smirk that never seemed to leave his face, was notorious for his attitude. He sauntered over to Lily's table, the smirk growing wider. Brad gave her a once-over, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What can I get you?" he asked, his tone barely concealing disdain. Lily smiled politely. "I'll have the scrambled eggs, toast, and a cup of coffee, please." Brad didn't bother writing it down. "Sure, if you say so," he muttered under his breath, walking away without so much as a nod from her seat. Lily noticed Brad's interactions with other customers. He was all smiles and banter at the tables occupied by white patrons, but whenever he approached a person of color, his demeanor shifted, cold, curt, and dismissive. Lily took a mental note but decided not to let it ruin her morning. When her order finally arrived, the plate was practically thrown onto the table, and the coffee cup wobbled precariously. Lily caught it just in time to avoid a spill. She glanced up at Brad, who didn't even apologize. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly, her voice firm but measured. Brad shrugged. "Depends. Do you have one?" Before Lily could respond, Gary the manager walked over, having noticed the tension. "Everything all right here?" he asked, though his tone suggested he didn't particularly care for her side of the story. "Actually, Lily," she began, "the service has been—" "Look, lady," Gary interrupted, "we're busy. If you're looking for five-star treatment, this isn't the place. You're not special." The words hung in the air, a few heads turning to witness the exchange. Lily felt her chest tighten but maintained her composure. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers, and sense the judgment, yet she refused to let them see her falter. "I wasn't asking for special treatment," she said, her voice steady. "Just basic respect." Gary scoffed, waving her off. "If you don't like it, you can take your business elsewhere." The blatant dismissal stung, but Lily didn't budge. Instead, she leaned back, her gaze never leaving Gary's. "Noted," she said, her tone carrying a quiet authority that seemed to momentarily unsettle him. But the moment passed quickly, and both men walked away, laughing amongst themselves. As Lily ate her now lukewarm breakfast, she couldn't help but think about the countless stories she'd heard over the years, stories of people being belittled, dismissed, and dehumanized simply because of their race. Today, she was living one of those stories. While it was infuriating, it was also a stark reminder of why she fought so hard in her profession. She took out her notebook, jotting down a few observations about the diner, Brad, and Gary. It wasn't just about the incident anymore. There was something systemic here, something that went beyond a rude waiter or a dismissive manager. She wanted to understand it, document it, and eventually address it. The next hour passed slowly. Lily sipped her coffee, pretending to read her papers while suddenly observing the staff's behavior toward other customers. It was a pattern as clear as day. Brad's disdain wasn't just directed at her, it was a pervasive attitude that Gary seemed to condone, if not encourage. When Lily finally rose to leave, she approached the counter to pay. Brad was there, leaning against the register looking bored. "That'll be $12.50, he said flatly. Lily handed over her card, her expression neutral as he processed the payment. She caught a glimpse of the name tag pinned to his uniform, Bradley J. She memorized it. "Have a nice day," he said, sarcasm dripping from his words. Lily smiled a genuine smile that left Brad momentarily puzzled. "You too," she replied. "I'll be seeing you again soon." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving the diner behind. She knew she wouldn't be able to let this incident go, not just for her sake, but for everyone else who had endured similar treatment in silence. What Brad and Gary didn't know was that Lily had the power to bring real consequences to their actions. As she walked to her car, she made a call. "Good morning, this is Judge Johnson," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I need to set up a meeting regarding an establishment called Mason's Diner. There's something we need to address." Lily's heels clicked purposefully against the courthouse's marble floors as she strode into her chambers. The next morning, her mind replayed the events at Mason's Diner, each moment fueling her resolve. She set her briefcase down and sat at her desk, flipping through a stack of case files, yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the blatant disrespect and arrogance she had experienced. Knocking interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." She called her assistant, Lena, who stepped in carrying a fresh cup of coffee. "Morning, Judge Johnson. You seem deep in thought." Lily offered a small smile. "Morning, Lena. Let's just say I had an eye-opening breakfast yesterday." Lena raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Instead, she handed over the coffee. "By the way, your schedule is packed today, but you've got a window for a working lunch. Want me to order in?" Lily shook her head. "No, I'll handle lunch, thanks." Once Lena left, Lily leaned back in her chair, her mind already formulating a plan. She opened her laptop and began researching Mason's Diner. Public reviews painted a picture that aligned with her experience, glowing praise from some patrons but disturbing reports of discrimination from others. It was a pattern, and one that demanded further investigation. Later that day, Lily presided over her morning cases, her sharp mind and calm demeanor commanding respect in the courtroom. But during breaks, she discreetly worked on gathering more information. She reached out to colleagues and acquaintances in the legal community, asking if they'd heard any complaints about Mason's Diner. By noon, she had a small pile of testimonies and complaints. A mother denied service because her mixed-race children were too rowdy, a young black man ignored for 20 minutes while white customers were seated and served promptly, and a Latino woman insulted in Spanish by a waiter who assumed she didn't understand the language. The pieces were coming together, but Lily knew she needed more. She decided it was time to get first-hand accounts from those who had experienced similar treatment. That evening, Lily made a call to a community advocacy group. "Hi, this is Lily Johnson. I'm looking into a potential case of systemic discrimination at Mason's Diner. Could you connect me with individuals who've reported incidents there?" The response was immediate. Within hours, Lily had a list of names and contact information for people willing to share their stories. She scheduled interviews for the following days, determined to get a comprehensive picture of the diner's practices. The next morning, Lily met with her first interviewee, a young woman named Jasmine. They sat in a quiet corner of a local coffee shop, the atmosphere warm and welcoming. "I've been to Mason's Diner twice," Jasmine began, her hands wrapped around her mug. "The first time, I thought maybe it was just a bad day, but the second time it was clear, the way they treated me compared to other customers, it was like I didn't exist." Jasmine recounted how Brad had ignored her for nearly 10 minutes before finally taking her order, only to bring out the wrong dish with a dismissive attitude. When she complained, Gary had accused her of being difficult and suggested she eat elsewhere. "It felt humiliating," Jasmine said, her voice trembling slightly. "I left in tears." Lily listened intently, taking detailed notes. "Thank you for sharing this, Jasmine. Your story is important and it's going to help build a case." Over the next few days, Lily interviewed more individuals, each story more infuriating than the last. There was Marcus, a college student who had been openly mocked by Brad for ordering a vegetarian meal, Maria, a nurse who was denied a table during a busy lunch hour while others were seated promptly. One evening, after wrapping up her last interview, Lily sat in her study reviewing the stack of testimonies. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lena, "Reminder, you have the city council meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Lily replied with a quick thanks, before setting her phone down. The city council meeting was her opportunity to bring the issue to a broader audience. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Calling out discrimination in public forums often met resistance, but it was a necessary step. The next day, Lily walked into the city council chamber, her presence commanding attention. As usual, she took her seat, scanning the agenda. When it was her turn to speak, she stood. "I'd like to bring to the council's attention a matter of public concern," she began. Mason's Diner, a local establishment, has been the subject of multiple complaints regarding discriminatory practices. She outlined the evidence, presenting a compelling case supported by first-hand accounts. The room buzzed with murmurs as Lily spoke, her words resonating with those who had faced similar injustices. After her presentation, one of the council members, a man named Robert, raised a hand. "Judge Johnson, what specific actions do you propose we take?" Lily met his gaze, her expression resolute. "I propose a formal investigation into Mason's Diner. We need to hold businesses accountable for discriminatory practices that harm our community." The council debated the issue, but Lily's compelling argument and the weight of the testimony she presented left little room for doubt. By the end of the meeting, they agreed to initiate an investigation. As Lily left the chamber, she felt a sense of accomplishment but knew the fight was far from over. The investigation was just the beginning. She had set the wheels in motion, but the real challenge lay ahead, ensuring justice was served. Lily's phone buzzed early the next morning. It was Robert, the council member who had supported her proposal for an investigation. His tone was serious as he spoke. "Judge Johnson, I thought you'd want to know we've received a lot of pushback from Mason's Diner. They've already lawyered up." Lily expected as much. "Good. Let's see how far they're willing to go to defend the indefensible." Later that day, she headed to the courthouse, her mind already calculating the next steps. The council's investigation would take time, but Lily wasn't the type to sit idly by. She knew she had the legal acumen to make Mason's Diner regret their blatant disregard for human decency. Around lunchtime, Lily walked into a modest office where the council's legal team was assembling. A young lawyer named Ethan stood by a whiteboard, his sleeves rolled up, a marker in hand. "Judge Johnson," Ethan greeted her with a nod. "We've gathered initial reports from witnesses willing to testify, but we need more concrete evidence if we're going to build a strong case." Lily took a seat, her eyes scanning the room. "We'll get it. Discrimination leaves a trail, and if Mason's Diner has been operating like this for years, there's plenty to uncover." Ethan gestured toward a stack of papers. "We've subpoenaed employee records and surveillance footage. If the owners cooperate, we might find patterns of behavior that align with the testimonies." Lily leaned forward, focusing on Brad and Gary. They were the linchpins. Their behavior set the tone for the entire establishment. The team worked diligently, combing through files and analyzing footage. Lily observed, offering insights when needed. Every moment spent digging felt like a step closer to justice. As the day wore on, tension filled the room. The council's investigators unearthed discrepancies in employee records and scheduling. Minority employees were frequently assigned less favorable shifts, while Brad and Gary seemed to favor white staff members for more lucrative hours. That evening, Lily sat in her car outside Mason's Diner. She wasn't there to eat this time. Instead, she observed the flow of customers, noting how the staff interacted with different people. It was subtle, but the bias was clear. White customers were greeted warmly, seated quickly, and served with a smile, while people of color received curt, almost robotic service. The next day, Lily returned to her chambers. Her assistant, Lena, entered with a file. "Judge Johnson, you might want to see this. It's the latest data from the council's investigation." Lily opened the file and scanned its contents. Among the documents was a particularly damning piece of evidence, a complaint email from a former employee. The writer detailed how Brad and Gary had instructed staff to prioritize regulars and keep troublemakers in check, using coded language that translated to discriminating against minority patrons. "This is exactly what we need," Lily muttered. She picked up her phone and dialed Robert. "We've got something. Let's plan a meeting to discuss the next steps." That evening, Lily met with the council again. The atmosphere in the room was heavy but filled with determination. Ethan presented the findings, laying out a timeline of discriminatory practices at Mason's Diner. Based on our evidence, Ethan concluded, we can file a formal complaint and push for a public hearing. Robert nodded. It's a strong case, but we'll face significant opposition. Mason's Diner is a long-standing establishment in this community, and they'll use that to their advantage. Lily's voice was calm but firm. Then we'll let the facts speak for themselves. This isn't just about one diner, it's about setting a precedent. Over the following weeks, the council moved forward with the hearing. The local media caught wind of the story, and soon headlines painted Mason's Diner in an unflattering light. Public opinion began to shift as more people came forward with their experiences. Meanwhile, Brad and Gary continued to run their business as usual, seemingly unfazed. But Lily knew their confidence wouldn't last. One afternoon, Lily received a call from an unexpected source, Mason's Diner's legal team. A lawyer named Mitchell introduced himself, his tone cordial but guarded. "Judge Johnson," he began, "we've been made aware of your involvement in the council's investigation. My clients are concerned about the impact this could have on their business." Lily smirked. Perhaps they should have thought of that before engaging in discriminatory practices. Mitchell didn't falter. "We'd like to propose a meeting to discuss a possible settlement." Lily's tone remained steady. "I'll relay your message to the council, but know this, we're not interested in sweeping this under the rug." The call ended, and Lily felt a renewed sense of purpose. Mason's Diner was starting to feel the pressure, but she wouldn't rest until justice was served. The news about Mason spread like wildfire. The once beloved establishment quickly became the center of controversy, with people sharing their personal experiences on social media. Stories of cold stares, delayed service, and outright refusal of entry painted a grim picture of the diner's reality. Lily scrolled through her phone, reading one testimony after another. Each post added another layer of validation to the investigation. It was clear that Mason's Diner had fostered a toxic environment for years, but this public outcry was finally bringing the truth to light. Later that week, Lily attended a town hall meeting. The room buzzed with energy as residents gathered to discuss the council's findings. Some were angry, others defensive, but most were simply curious about what would happen next. Robert stepped up to the podium, his voice carrying over the crowd. "We've conducted a thorough investigation into Mason's Diner, and the results are disturbing. Our community deserves better." A murmur rippled through the audience. One man stood up, his face flushed with indignation. "This is all a smear campaign. Mason's has been a part of this town for decades. Are we really going to let a few disgruntled customers ruin its reputation?" Lily rose from her seat, commanding attention with her calm demeanor. "This isn't about ruining reputations. It's about holding people accountable. We have evidence of systemic discrimination, and it's our duty to address it." Her words silenced the room, but the tension was palpable. The town was divided, with some clinging to nostalgia and others demanding change. Meanwhile, Brad and Gary watched the fallout from the safety of their office. Gary paced the room, his face a mask of frustration. "This is ridiculous. We've done nothing wrong." Brad, leaning against the desk, smirked. "Let them talk. They'll get bored and move on. This town loves us too much to let a little drama ruin our business." But their confidence wavered, and a customer confronted them during a busy lunch rush. A young woman who had been seated in the back corner, despite the diner being half empty, marched up to the counter. "Excuse me," she said loudly, drawing the attention of everyone around. "Why is it that I, the only black customer here, get shoved into a corner while others are seated near the windows?" Brad stepped forward, his smile tight. "We seat people based on availability. If you don't like it, you're welcome to leave." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because I've been coming here for months, and this always happens." "Care to explain?" Gary tried to intervene. "Look, we don't have to explain ourselves to you. If you have a problem, take it up with management." The woman crossed her arms. "Oh, I intend to. and I'll be telling everyone I know about this place," she stormed out. The other customers whispered amongst themselves, some left shaking their heads in disapproval while others stayed, their loyalty unwavering. The incident didn't go unnoticed. Within hours, a video of the confrontation surfaced online, further tarnishing Mason's Diner's reputation. The backlash intensified, with people organizing protests outside the diner. Lily watched the video, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew the fight was far from over. The public support was crucial, but the legal battle ahead would be even more challenging. The council prepared for the upcoming hearing, gathering additional evidence and interviewing witnesses. Lily worked closely with Ethan, reviewing every detail to ensure their case was airtight. One afternoon, Ethan approached her with a concerned look. "Judge Johnson, we've hit a snag. Mason's legal team is trying to discredit our witnesses. They're digging into their pasts, looking for anything that could undermine their credibility." Lily sighed. "Of course they are. It's a classic tactic, but we won't let them derail us. Focus on the facts, the truth is on our side." The pressure mounted as the hearing date approached. The council's legal team doubled down on their efforts, determined to expose the truth. Meanwhile, Mason's Diner scrambled to salvage their reputation, issuing half-hearted apologies and offering discounts to appease customers. But it was too little, too late. The community's trust had been broken, and no amount of damage control could fix it. On the day of the hearing, the courthouse was packed, journalists lining the halls eager to report on the high-profile case. Lily took her seat, her expression unreadable as she prepared to face the challenge ahead. Brad and Gary arrived, flanked by their legal team. Their usual arrogance was replaced by nervous energy as they glanced around the room, aware they were under scrutiny. As the proceedings began, the council presented their case, detailing the patterns of discrimination that had plagued Mason's Diner for years. Witnesses took the stand, sharing their experiences with clarity and conviction. The defense fought back, attempting to poke holes in the testimonies and shift the blame, but Lily remained steadfast, her presence a constant reminder that justice was within reach. The courtroom buzzed with tension as more witnesses were called to testify, each one adding a piece to the puzzle and painting a clear picture of the toxic culture at Mason's Diner. Among the witnesses was Diane, a former waitress who had worked at the diner for 5 years before quitting. Diane took a deep breath as she stepped onto the stand, her hands trembling slightly. The defense lawyer wasted no time. "Miss Evans, can you confirm that you left Mason's Diner due to personal reasons unrelated to any alleged discriminatory practices?" Diane lifted her chin, her voice steady. "I left because I couldn't stand watching customers of color being treated like second-class citizens. I saw it happen too many times." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The lawyer smirked, trying to regain control. "And yet you never reported these so-called incidents to the authorities." "I was young and scared, but that doesn't mean they didn't happen," Diane replied. The council's attorney, Mr. Harris, nodded appreciatively. "Miss Evans, can you share a specific incident that stood out to you?" Diane's eyes hardened. "One day, a family came in, a mother and her 2 kids. They were polite, ordered quickly, and didn't make any fuss, but Brad seated them near the kitchen, even though there were open tables by the windows. He claimed it was policy to keep the prime spots for regulars. I knew it was because they were black." The audience murmured. Brad, sitting at the defense table, shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer whispered something in his ear, but he didn't respond. The defense tried to discredit Diane, bringing up unrelated past issues, but her testimony left a lasting impact. She was just one of many voices, each one building a stronger case against Mason's Diner. Meanwhile, outside the courtroom, protesters gathered with signs like "Justice for All" and "End Discrimination Now," filling the air. The crowd was a mix of locals and activists from neighboring towns, all united by a common goal. Inside the courtroom, drama intensified as the defense called their own witnesses, including longtime customers who swore they had never seen any discrimination. One man, Mr. Walters, even claimed, "I've been coming to Mason's for 20 years. Brad and Gary have always treated me like family." Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow. And do you happen to know if any of the other customers felt the same way? Walters hesitated. Well, I can't speak for everyone. Exactly, Harris said sharply. Just because you didn't experience it doesn't mean it didn't happen. The defense stumbled, but they weren't giving up. They presented logs of customer complaints, attempting to show that Mason's Diner treated everyone equally poorly, regardless of race. It was a desperate move, but they hoped it would cast doubt on the council's claims. During a recess, Lily stepped outside to catch her breath, the weight of the case heavy, but she couldn't afford to falter. She watched the protesters, their energy invigorating her. This fight was bigger than her, it was about creating lasting change. As she re-entered the courthouse, she noticed Brad and Gary arguing in hushed tones near the restroom. Brad's face was red with anger, while Gary looked on the verge of panic. This is a disaster, Brad hissed. We should have settled this before it got to court. Gary shot back, it's too late now. We just have to hope our lawyers can spin it. Lily kept her distance but made a mental note, their facade was cracking, and it was only a matter of time before the truth came out in full. Back in the courtroom, the counsel introduced new evidence, emails between Brad and Gary discussing seating arrangements. The emails were damning, with phrases like "keep the front tables for our kind of people," and "we don't want to scare off the regulars." The defense tried to argue that the emails were taken out of context, but the damage was done. The jury exchanged looks, their skepticism evident. As the day drew to a close, Lily felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. The case was far from over, but they were making progress. The courtroom adjourned for the day, leaving everyone on edge for what was to come. Outside, reporters swarmed her for a statement. Lily, flanked by her legal team, addressed the crowd. We're here to seek justice. This case is about more than just one diner. It's about ensuring that everyone in our community is treated with respect and dignity. Her words were met with applause, but she knew the fight wasn't over. Brad and Gary remained defiant, their lawyers vowing to continue the battle. As night fell, Lily returned to her office to prepare for the next day. She pored over documents, determined to leave no stone unturned. The stakes were high, but she was ready to see this through. The courtroom was a storm of emotions as the trial entered its most pivotal phase. The counsel's team had just introduced a new witness, a woman named Rosa, a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes and a presence that demanded attention. Rosa worked as a dishwasher at Mason's Diner for 7 years. Though often invisible to customers, she had seen everything from the shadows of the kitchen. As she walked to the witness stand, the tension in the room was palpable. The defense lawyer, clearly rattled, leaned toward Brad and whispered, "Did you know about her?" Brad's face paled. "No, she's just a dishwasher." What could she possibly know? When Mr. Harris, the counsel's attorney, began his questioning, the entire room leaned in. "Miss Rosa, can you tell us about your time working at Mason's Diner?" She took a deep breath and began, "I started there when I was just trying to make ends meet. At first, I thought it was just a normal job, but I soon realized there was a pattern, a disturbing one." The defense immediately objected, but the judge overruled. Rosa continued, her voice steady. "I often saw Brad and Gary treat certain customers differently. When black families came in, they were often ignored for long periods. Sometimes, they were even told the kitchen was closed while other customers were served right away." Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his lawyer frantically jotting down notes. Rosa wasn't done. "One day, I overheard Brad joking in the back. He said, 'Why bother giving them good service? They won't tip anyway.' That stuck with me. It wasn't just one bad day, it was the culture of the place." The courtroom erupted in whispers, and the judge had to call for order. The defense lawyer stepped up, ready to cross-examine Rosa. "Miss Rosa, if things were so bad, why didn't you quit? Why stay for 7 years? Rosa met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I needed the money, and I believed things might change. But they never did." The defense tried to discredit her, bringing up minor discrepancies in her employment record, but Rosa's testimony had already left a mark. Her courage inspired other witnesses who had been hesitant to speak up. The next day, a man named Tell came forward. He was a local contractor who had frequented Mason's diner for years. Unlike others, he hadn't stayed silent. "I complained to Gary once," Tell admitted, his voice filled with frustration. "I told him his staff was disrespectful." "And what did he say?" Mr. Harris asked. Tell continued, "He laughed and told me, 'If you don't like it, you can leave.'" Gary's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. The court had heard enough to see a clear pattern of discrimination and arrogance from the diner's leadership. As the trial progressed, tensions outside the courtroom grew. Protesters clashed with a small group of counter-protesters who believed the diner was being unfairly targeted. Police had to step in to keep the peace, further highlighting how polarizing the case had become. Back in the courtroom, Brad was finally called to testify. His lawyer had prepped him extensively, but his arrogance was hard to contain. He walked to the stand with a smug expression, as if confident he could talk his way out of trouble. "Mr. Brad," Mr. Harris began, "how would you describe your approach to customer service?" Brad smirked. "I'd say I'm efficient. I keep things moving." "And does efficient include selectively seating people based on their race?" Mr. Harris pressed. Brad's smirk faltered. "Of course not. We seat people based on availability." Mr. Harris presented a seating chart from one of the days in question. "This chart shows you seated a group of white customers at a window table while a black family was told to sit near the restroom. How do you explain that?" Brad hesitated, clearly unprepared for such specific evidence. "That must have been a coincidence." The jury wasn't buying it. Mr. Harris pressed on, "Is it also a coincidence that your emails to Mr. Gary discuss keeping certain types of customers out of sight?" Brad stumbled through a weak explanation, but the damage was clear. His testimony only served to reinforce the counsel's case. Meanwhile, Gary sat stone-faced, knowing his turn was coming. His lawyer had advised him to remain calm, but the mounting evidence was impossible to ignore. When Gary finally took the stand, he tried to downplay his role. "I'm just a manager," Gary said, his voice low. "I don't make all the decisions, but you enforce them." Mr. Harris shot back, "And you've actively supported discriminatory practices, haven't you?" Gary dodged the question, but the jury could see through his evasions. The counsel's team was relentless, ensuring every piece of evidence was laid bare. As the trial neared its conclusion, the air in the courtroom grew heavier. Each side prepared their final arguments, knowing the outcome would have far-reaching implications. For Lily, it wasn't just about this case, it was about sending a message. The public watched closely, with news outlets covering every twist and turn. The diner's reputation was in tatters, and even those who once defended it began to reconsider their stance. Brad and Gary's arrogance had finally caught up with them, and it was clear that justice was on the horizon. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Lily prepared to deliver her final judgment. The culmination of the trial had drawn widespread attention, with reporters and protesters packing the space outside. Inside, every eye was on her. The chief judge, whose calm demeanor masked the weight of her decision, waited for Lily to speak. But before the judgment, the defense team made one last desperate attempt to sway the case in their favor. Brad and Gary's attorney, adjusting his tie nervously, approached the jury with a forced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "my clients may have made mistakes, but we all do. They were simply running a business under immense pressure." "Mistakes?" "Yes." "Racism?" "That's a harsh accusation. Brad and Gary are hard-working men who've been unfairly vilified. They've already suffered enough through public humiliation and financial loss. Let's not destroy what remains of their lives." The jury remained unmoved, their faces cold. They had seen the evidence, heard the testimonies, and watched the smug confidence of Brad and Gary crumble under the weight of their own actions. Lily's gaze was steely as she listened. She knew this case was about far more than two individuals, it was about accountability and the pervasive impact of systemic discrimination. When the defense finished, Mr. Harris, the counsel's attorney rose for his closing statement. His voice was firm but impassioned. This case is not about mistakes. It's about choices, conscious, deliberate choices to treat certain customers as less than human. Brad and Gary had every opportunity to correct their behavior, to treat all patrons with dignity. Instead, they chose to perpetuate a culture of exclusion and humiliation. He pointed toward the jury. This isn't just about holding two men accountable, it's about sending a clear message that discrimination in any form will not be tolerated. The law exists to protect everyone equally, and today, you have the power to uphold that principle. With that, he returned to his seat. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as Lily prepared to speak. She shuffled her papers methodically, ensuring every word she was about to deliver carried the weight it deserved. Brad and Gary, she began, her voice measured, you have been accused of engaging in discriminatory practices that violate the fundamental principles of equality and justice. Over the course of this trial, we have heard overwhelming evidence of your actions that have caused harm, humiliation, and indignity to countless individuals. The room was still as she continued. As the chief judge, it is my duty to ensure that justice is not only served but seen to be served. This case has revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior that cannot go unaddressed. Brad shifted uncomfortably, his bravado now replaced with visible fear. Gary, who had maintained a stoic front, finally looked down, his shoulders slumping. Lily's voice grew firmer. Racism, whether overt or subtle, has no place in our society. It undermines the very fabric of our communities and perpetuates cycles of inequality. The actions you both took were not mere lapses in judgment, they were deliberate choices rooted in prejudice. She paused, letting her words sink in. Therefore, it is the decision of this court to hold you accountable. In addition to significant financial penalties, you will both be required to undergo mandatory anti-discrimination training and serve a period of community service in organizations that support marginalized communities. The sentence was met with a mix of relief and satisfaction from the crowd. For many, this moment represented a step toward justice, a small victory in a larger battle against systemic inequality. Brad and Gary's reactions were starkly different. Brad's face contorted with a mix of anger and disbelief. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, only to be quickly silenced by his lawyer. Gary, on the other hand, appeared resigned, as though the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. He nodded slightly, perhaps acknowledging in some small way the fairness of the judgment. Lily wasn't done. She addressed the courtroom as a whole. Let this case serve as a reminder that we all have a role to play in fostering a more just and equitable society. Discrimination in any form must be challenged and eradicated. Only then can we move toward true equality. The courtroom erupted in applause, a rare moment of public emotion in such a solemn setting. Lily allowed herself to understand the significance of this case to those who had been directly affected and to the wider community watching from outside. As the gavel fell, signaling the end of the trial, Brad and Gary were escorted out by their legal team. The once confident duo now appeared small, their reputations and livelihoods shattered by their own actions. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements, but Lily declined. She believed her judgment spoke for itself. As she stepped into her car, she glanced at the crowd, catching the eye of a young woman holding a sign that read "Justice for All." Lily nodded subtly, a silent acknowledgement of the journey that lay ahead. This case, she knew, was just one chapter in a much larger story. But for today, justice had prevailed. If you liked this story, share your thoughts and observations in the comments section below, and make sure to like and subscribe for the next interesting and entertaining story ever. Also, to strengthen our community, I would like to know where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video. Have a nice day.